We continue on with our coverage of the Supreme Court's 6-3 decision to strike down President Donald Trump's widespread tariffs that he has levied in his second term. And this juncture, we're going to bring on a special guest, actually. Alex Jacquez joins us, the Chief of Policy and Advocacy at Groundwork Collaborative, a former special assistant to the President for Economic Development and Industrial Strategy. Mr. Jacquez has worked under both the Biden administration and the Obama administration. Alex, we really appreciate you taking some time. Quite a morning for everyone here, of course. I'm assuming the same for you. First of all, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us for a little bit.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. Busy morning.
Busy morning, I bet. And we'll start there. We'll keep it broad to start. I mean, just your initial reaction to this ruling from the Supreme Court.
So this is obviously a blow to President Trump and his what has been kind of near unlimited authority over the Supreme Court. They have checked him on this specific ruling with using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to impose tariffs and struck down his collection of $175 billion worth of tariffs thus far. But it does not constrain the president going forward on a number of other statutes that at a press conference just now, he already said that he will be signing to move forward on. So we have two big unknowns. First, how do the next couple weeks and months play out as he is initiating investigations to impose further tariffs on our trading partners? And then what happens to the money that's been collected? All of that is going to have to go through the Court of International Trade. The Supreme Court was silent on whether businesses are owed rebates for the money already paid. So still more to come, although this was a huge news this morning.
Yeah, and that press conference ongoing, we did play the entirety of that press conference up until we had you join us here. So we too heard from the president as he sort of went headstrong right into the notion that he would be levying more tariffs, that this would not stop him from levying tariffs. It would only stop him from using IEPA to levy those tariffs. And just for our audience, IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, it is an act that states that the president does have control over exports and imports in times of emergency. That is the specific thing that has been overruled by the Supreme Court. But as you said, more statutes that allow him to attempt to levy these tariffs. You know, I want to ask something that I've heard you harp on as I was looking through some of your work leading up to this interview, is the danger of the uncertainty that has come with this entire tariff operation. We heard President Trump say multiple times in that press conference that now there is certainty. And yet, in just your first answer here, you note two aspects of this situation that remain uncertain. Do we have any more certainty, or does this remain a very unknown future when it comes to tariffs for businesses and citizens alike?
No, we really don't have any certainty whatsoever. And for the last year or so, we've seen it both in the hard data, the economic numbers, and the soft data, what businesses and consumers are telling us, that people feel like they can't go out and make big purchases. Businesses can't make big investments. They aren't doing much hiring because they really have no idea what the policy is going to look like on trade tomorrow, next week, or next month. And none of that changes today. So while it looks like some tariffs, and maybe all of them, will be kind of recreated through these new executive orders that are being signed today, Trump himself said at that press conference, we might have 5 years to go through the courts on these rebates, no matter how long it takes. There are thousands of cases in front of the Court of International Trade right now. It's going to take time to make it through that backlog. And if you're a business that's looking to build a big new factory, you don't know what the president is going to charge for steel or for inputs or components in the next week or the next year. And you don't know if you're going to get back all the money that you've paid over the last year in tariffs. I don't know how you go forward with these major business decisions. So we saw today GDP has been down this year compared to the last 2 years. We've seen in the labor market, basically hiring has crawled to a stop. And there's just really no appetite for making these big ticket investments, big ticket purchases, and big hiring right now.
And then we talk about the uncertainty when it comes to what is going to happen with the money that has been collected from these tariffs so far. President Trump did note in his press conference, which for full posterity has just ended. President Trump's White House press briefing officially over. But back to what we're speaking on here. With that money, he said that he had wished the Supreme Court had included something in their ruling about what to do with that money. Would that have been within the purview of the Supreme Court? Is that something that could have been a part of this ruling?
Sure, it could have. And it was very intentionally punted to back to the Court of International Trade. Justice Kavanaugh, in his dissent, actually wrote specifically about the fact that the majority did not say what to do with all of the money that was collected. According to the Penn Wharton budget model, that's about $175 billion between April 2025 and February 2026. That's not pennies, right? So it's going to be a huge amount of money to figure out how to deal with, and it's going to be complicated. Sometimes the importer of record, the people who actually pay the tariffs, are not the same company as those who are buying the imports. There's going to be a lot of complications over who gets paid, how those payments get spread out. And of course, consumers who ended up paying a good chunk of the tariffs in the form of higher prices for goods, they're not the ones getting the rebates, it's the businesses. And I think it's very unlikely that businesses are going to lower prices at this time, particularly with all the uncertainty.
And, when it comes to, we've already been over, I think, maybe some of the possible answers to this next question, but when it comes to people who are observing this decision and who just keep an eye on the pulse of national politics, they see what's going on, what do you think will be the most common misconception or misinterpretation of what we've seen today from the Supreme Court?
I think that people may think that this is a win for the rule of law, for the Supreme Court coming back and asserting its place in the discourse between the executive branch and the congressional branch. I really don't see that as the case. In fact, the justices were clear, at least in the majority, that the president does have authority to impose either most of or all of the same total amounts in tariffs through other statutes. They just said he couldn't use this one specifically, and they tied it to their, quote, major questions doctrine, which is used to kind of further constrain what agencies can do unilaterally. The Democrats or the Democratic appointed justices on the court dissented from that specific interpretation. But I don't view this as a big win for the Supreme Court over President Trump. Minutes after or hours after they announced it, he basically put all the tariffs back on. We'll see more of that over the next couple of weeks and months, and kind of more confusion in the business community and the economy.
And we talk about that confusion in the business community here domestically, in the economy here in the United States, when it comes to our foreign trade partners who are surely keeping a close eye on this decision. What is the most likely reaction internationally to a decision like this? Does that uncertainty remain for our trade partners as it does for many here in the country?
Definitely. What President Trump said he was imposing immediately is a 10% across the board global tariff. So everybody's going to be hit with it. He's allowed to do that for 150 days through Section 122 authority, it's called. And then he'll need to go to Congress if he wants to go any longer. And in that time period, he's going to launch investigations into countries and sectors specifically so that he can impose either higher or different tariffs based on those investigations. So I think there's going to be a lot of jockeying with our trade partners to try to influence those investigations and those decisions like there was during the Liberation Day pause. And of course, there's a number of trade agreements that have been agreed to, at least in principle, that now seem to no longer be valid because they involve changing tariff rates that were imposed by IEEPA. So I think, again, this is going to be a lot of a headache for our trading partners who are already concerned about how to navigate the United States' place in the country and how they're using trade authority right now.
And anytime something like this happens, I think people, including us here in the media, have a sort of a desire to break it down into simple wins and losses. And as you stated, maybe the initial reaction to this would be that it is a loss for President Trump and his administration. But just talking to you during this conversation, it seems like in many ways it's just as much of a win. Is that reasonable for me to kind of summarize it that way?
I think so. It's not as much as a setback as a step sideways, right? He is still going to go forward and do the ultimate policy that he wants to do. It's just going to take a little different route. I would say if you're looking for losers right here, it's businesses and consumers right now, particularly those who have paid a significant amount in tariffs over the last year and now have no idea whether they're going to get any of that money back.
And so, if you are the opposition party, if you are Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Democrats who are looking ahead to midterms and attempting to, strengthen their party as President Donald Trump continues to push his agenda, what do you think is the most likely move? What are the moves for Democratic leadership as they approach this Supreme Court ruling, or even the narratives that they are going to look to sort of create from this?
I think it's simple. The president illegally drove up the cost of goods. He took money out of the pockets of working people across the country, and he should give it back. There should be refunds due to consumers, not just businesses, not just the ones who hiked prices and had to pay the tariffs, but consumers. You saw the cost of everything from back to school goods to summer grilling equipment over the summer holidays to artificial Christmas trees in December. Basically, everything that we imported went up in cost, and Democrats should fight to get that money back for them. And they should hold President Trump accountable to getting that money back to consumers. He's constantly talking about writing checks, refunds, tariff rebates, tax rebates. I think they should fight for him to give that money back right now. I will say I don't think people want to hear about congressional authority over tariffs or the kind of inside Washington power games that are being played between the branches. People want their money back. They're sick of higher prices, and Democrats should fight to get it back for them.
And hearing about power games within Congress, just one answer after hearing that the losers in this situation are the American people is certainly difficult for your average person to sit and hear. Now, I don't want to ask, I know this is an incredibly sort of reductive question for such a complicated solution, but since you brought up rebates and payments, is that something where that would just be a flat, almost like what we saw during COVID, just a check that goes out to every American that contains a certain portion of those tariff profits?
You could. I've seen some members of Congress and committees start to talk about making sure that consumers are getting rebates. Of course, it's hard to get an exact dollar figure in what people have paid, but there's analysis out there that households paid $1,200 more last year on average than they would have paid without the tariffs. I think, starting from there and working backwards would be a good place to start.
A broader economic question for you. Obviously, we're in a situation where, as you said, the American people have taken a number of financial losses over the course of the past few years. And so putting money back in their pockets is something that does have some validity to it and may be pushed for in Congress. At the same time, we remain in a very delicate situation when it comes to inflation. Based on everything we hear from Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, that is something that they are incredibly cautious about right now. Is there any concern that just pumping that amount of money back into the economy could have negative impacts on inflation and continue to keep us stuck in this cycle of suffering from that particular affliction?
Prices are still higher than the Federal Reserve and certainly what the American people want them to be. That is true. We saw this morning prices remain elevated. It's not ticking down to that 2% level that the Fed would like to see. But I'd like to consider the reverse. I think we have done damage to the American consumer by taking money out of their pockets. In the same report this morning, we saw that consumers' real incomes are basically flat. Their wages are not outpacing inflation, and we see that the savings rate has dropped considerably over the last several years. People are dipping into their savings, their rainy day funds, just to be able to make ends meet month to month. And so I think we are in a place where consumers have paid this money. It is owed back to them, and a struggling consumer is also going to be detrimental to the economy. You need spending growth to ensure that we are creating jobs. Jobs were basically flat since Liberation Day. So I think there's real harm on the other side of the equation as well in the economy not growing strong and fast enough.
And then a final question for you. Donald Trump talked a lot about national security and how this could impact national security during his press conference when it comes to the back and forth, the chaos that has come along with tariffs, taking them down, putting them back on. Is that something that is a concern when it comes to national security?
I think the national security arguments that Donald Trump has used to justify these tariffs really don't hold water. He started with the premise that the trade deficit, in and of itself, is considered a major national security risk. But then, when he started imposing further and further tariffs on different countries, I mean, he threatened IEEPA tariffs on Canada for airing a commercial he didn't like during the World Series. He imposed tariffs on Brazil, threatened tariffs on Brazil if they did not pardon their former indicted president, Bolsonaro. He is essentially using that clause and the broad applicability to make up national security justifications for any tariffs he wants to impose.
And you have emphasized this again and again, but just for full posterity, I want to ask one more time his ability to do that, to use these tariffs in that way that you just described, that remains for the most part, despite the Supreme Court ruling, correct?
Through other statutes. So
Yeah.
there will have to be investigations in many cases. There will have to be findings. He can't raise these tariffs at the stroke of a pen in the same way, but essentially he is still going to be able to get there in the end.
Okay, Alex Jacquez, we cannot tell you how much we appreciate you joining us today to clear all of this up. Can't imagine how busy you are. So thanks so much for taking the time to hang with us for a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That was Alex Jacquez, Chief of Policy and Advocacy at Groundwork Collaborative, a former special assistant to the president for economic development, and a lot of insight there from Alex, sort of breaking this all down. A situation, a story, a headline that can be very complicated. And so it's always helpful when we can bring a guest on to give us a little bit more clarity about what this all means. A lot of big takeaways from that interview, but I think the one that maybe stands out is that this is not the end of tariffs. This does not mean that President Donald Trump cannot levy tariffs. It is through different statutes now, and through different avenues that he will have to levy those tariffs. And maybe there, like he said, there might be mechanisms that take a little bit more time. He might not be able to do this at the stroke of a pen, but nonetheless, tariffs remain a tool at Donald Trump's disposal and remain something that he can use as a part of his agenda just through different methods. That's something that really is clear after watching that press conference and then having Alex Jacquez on to break it all down. Now, before we kind of move on to other stories, before we start to look at other headlines here, let's look at a tweet from Speaker Mike Johnson on X, or a post on X. This is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He says, "No one can deny that the president's use of tariffs has brought in billions of dollars and created immense leverage for America's trade strategy and for securing strong, reciprocal America First trade agreements with countries that had been taking advantage of American workers for decades. Congress and the administration will determine the best path forward in the coming weeks." Much of that echoed in President Donald Trump's press conference, though President Trump appears to be Mike Johnson said in the coming weeks. President Donald Trump said, as Mr. Jacquez emphasized, another 10% tariff very, very soon will be hastily applied. So the amount of time, really, the only difference there. I also would like to read a statement from one of our Virginia senators, Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, both commenting on this ruling. I'm going to go ahead and read the comment from Senator Mark Warner today, who said, "Today's ruling is a win for American families who have been paying the price for Donald Trump's reckless tariff agenda. Let's be clear, tariffs are a tax on American consumers and small businesses already struggling to keep up with rising costs. As families struggle to afford groceries, rent, and everyday essentials, President Trump doubled down on a blanket tariff policy that drove up prices across the board and injected unnecessary chaos into our economy. His whiplash approach has also undermined trust with our allies and opened the door for China to present itself as a more reliable trading partner for the United States. We need a smarter, targeted approach to trade that actually strengthens American competitiveness and helps workers without punishing the very people it's supposed to help, and one that respects Congress's role in setting trade policy. Today's decision is an important step towards restoring some economic sanity for hardworking Americans." And that is the end of the quote from Senator Warner. And those hardworking Americans, highlighted by Alex Jacquez as the ones who will truly suffer from this continued uncertainty, these continued changes in tariff policy, this continued back and forth in Washington, ultimately will hurt the American people, the consumers, according to Alex Jacquez. So plenty more to come on this story, we're sure, in the coming weeks, but a landmark ruling from the Supreme Court today.